What's the next book gonna be about? Can't go on to the end and when might we?
The next installment of the Charlie Parker
Yeah.
story.
Exactly. When might we be able to see it?
About 2 years, maybe 3. What about 2? That's the plan, you know.
You're gonna take it to the end?
Well, see, Charlie Parker's life is very compressed, and the biggest problem for the second book is overcoming the form that a drug addict's life always takes. See, what I mean is, there are many unusual things that Charlie Parker knew and that he did, but he was basically a dope fiend, and they live a very there's what Tom was talking about, that everybody knows these tunes. Well, the problem with the second part, with the second book, is going to be the challenge of avoiding that predictability with the facts that I have a number of. See, what I mean is, because the dope fiend always, his life always goes the same way. Chet Baker's a perfect example. You know, Chet shoots dope, Chet kicks dope, Chet shoots more dope, Chet kicks dope, Chet is pulled back into dope. Chet's career is almost destroyed. Chet has a chance to make it on the basis of his talent. At the last moment, Chet decides to shoot some dope, and then he goes, and so it goes on like that over and over and over. That Charlie Parker's, the only difference in Charlie Parker's life is that with his wife, his third wife, Doris told me, was that people tend to think that Charlie Parker was a weak person.
A weak person?
Yeah. And she said, she said Charlie had his weaknesses. She said, but he kicked the drug habit many times at home. But then he had to go back to work.
Mm.
And when he went back to work, that was like sending an alcoholic
Right.
into a liquor store and tell him to watch the counter or watch the cash register. And he's got all these bottles of liquor around him, and you come back and then he's drunk. And you say, what are you doing? You know you're not supposed to be drinking liquor? Oh, you think so? That's why you asked me to work here. With all of these bottles within reach. And so Charlie Parker, when he went into a club, so many people thought it was hip to give Charlie Parker some drugs. And so, you know, you take some kid from Long Island, he's come down to 52nd Street, and he's got, yes, I'm sorry.
I was coming on 52nd Street.
So he comes down to 52nd Street, and he buys some dope, and he takes it in, and he hands it, and he gets in there and he hands it to Charlie Parker, and Charlie Parker takes it, and he goes off to his friends and said, hey man, I gave Charlie Parker a fix last night. Oh, right. So Charlie Parker's got to deal with those people. Then he's got to deal with other musicians who are pouring dope on him. Then, if he walks the streets, as Walter Davis told me one time, they were walking up to Harlem from 52nd Street. And at a certain point, every block somebody came and slipped some dope in Charlie Parker's pocket. And finally Charlie Parker said, he said, look, Walter, these people not gonna let me stop shooting dope. Let's go get out. And so he has to deal with that. And so, but the context that I can put these things in now will work because there's enough variety in his actual life to make it seem like, so that you don't feel like, wow, I have to read this story again.
This again.
You know, because see, just to close out, one story that is going to be in there is one that Max Roach told me about Charlie Parker that is so funny, and it tells you so much about Charlie Parker's this is a story. Max says that at one point he and Miles are talking, and Miles says, Max, we need to get a raise. Max says, we need a raise.
This is when they're playing with Charlie Parker's band.
We do need a raise, Miles. And he says, now you know, he's gonna get paid on Friday night. So we have to watch him and make sure he doesn't disappear with all the money. And then Max says, yes, Miles, he has done that often. He said, yeah, too often. He said, yeah, too often, Miles. So Miles says, so you watch him, Max, and I'll watch him, and we'll make sure he doesn't get away with the money. So they're both watching Charlie Parker, and Charlie Parker decides to leave the club.
After he gets paid?
Yeah, after he's got the money, and so they follow him outside, and then Max says, and then we did one of those gangster movie things. We got in the cab and said, follow the cab. And so the cab driver follows the cab. And Charlie Parker's cab goes right around the corner to the hotel where we all staying. And Charlie Parker gets out of the cab. So we sit there for a while. We watch him walk in the hotel. We get out of our cab. We go to the front of the hotel. We look at him in there, he's buoyant, joking with the people in the hotel. And then he goes to the elevator. So Miles and I are outside, and Miles says, let's go in now, Max. All right, Miles, let's go. So they go in the hotel. Then they go to the elevator, and they look down. And they see that the elevator is stopped on the floor where Charlie Parker is staying. So then they hurry on the elevator, and they get up there, and they go to that floor, and they get off. Then when they get to his room, Charlie Parker has not really closed the door. So the door is slightly ajar, and they can see through the doorway, through the door, that Charlie Parker is sitting there counting all of his money. Now he's sitting there, he has a stocking cap on, and he's counting 5, 10, 20, 30, blah, blah. And he's counting all his money. And then Miles says to Max, I think we better go in there and ask him, now you ready? And then Max says, yeah, Miles, I'm ready. And then Miles says, let's go then, Max. Let's go, Miles. Boom, and Max. So Miles pushes the door open and says, Charlie Parker, Max and I. And then Charlie Parker looks at him and said, wait a minute, gentlemen. I thought that human beings, as opposed to animals, knocked on doors before they came into rooms. Get the fuck out of here. So they back up and they go out. And then Miles says to Max, he says, Max, I think we have to try that again. so then he says, and so then Miles says, I'll knock. He says, all right, Miles, knock. So then Miles says, tap, 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 tap. No answer. Then he goes, tap, 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 tap. Still no answer. Then tap, 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 tap. Who is it? And then Miles says, Bird, it's me and Max. And he says, enter, gentlemen. And so they go in, and they can see this pillowcase filled with this money, that's pushed in the corner of the bed. But you can see all this money coming out of this pillowcase. And then Charlie Parker says, well, gentlemen, how can I help you? And Miles says, well, Bird, me and Max, we decided we needed a raise. And he says, Max, do you agree with him? Do you think you need a raise too? And Max says, yeah, Bird, me and Miles, we decided that we need a raise. Yes, we think you should give us a raise. We've been with the band long enough to get a raise. And then Bird says, well, gentlemen, I feel for a great sympathy for both of you. But I have to tell you, I do not have any money. And then Miles says, wait a minute, man. We can see all that money coming out of that pillowcase. And Charlie Parker, who has been sitting on the bed until then, stands up and he says, I don't like your hair.
I like your hair.
I don't like your forehead. I don't like your eyes. I don't like your nose. I don't like your teeth. I don't like your chin. I don't like your neck. I don't like the rest of your body. And I definitely do not like the way you try to play the fucking trumpet. And then Miles gets so mad, he reaches on this bureau and he snatches this bottle and he breaks the bottle and starts running at Charlie Parker as though he's gonna stab him. And then Charlie Parker looks at Max and says, Max, isn't Miles just the cutest thing when he gets mad? and then Miles just throws down the bottle and leaves the room. And then Charlie Parker says, Maxwell, I would advise you to follow that sad motherfucker out of here and get the fuck out of my room and don't bother me. And he ushers Max out and slams the door, and that was it. And so after that, then Max says, now that is Charlie Parker. He says, that was him completely. That's him. And so what I said to myself, I said, well, now that will be a great 3 pages or so. But what I mean is, if I can find all of the stories like that are as revealing about him or the situation, it'll be smooth sailing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in terms of creating a narrative that will be compelling to the reader. See, you know.
Anybody else? Any other questions?
Yes.
Way in the back.
I just had a question alluding to that, what you said before about Swing having a heroic optimism. I think that's what you said, right?
Right.
Thank you. So I was just kind of curious if there are writers who you think can command that sentiment, not in terms of the writing, but maybe speaking or being able to write about the people or that heroic optimism or about jazz in general, either non-fiction or fiction.
Well, I think that...
Thank you for restating a fiction-oriented question.
I think that that's a fundamental challenge to American writers, because American writers have to figure out how to transcend data. What I mean is, data is the enemy and the fundamental asset to a writer of a nonfiction work. But the problem is always bringing the data to life. And sometimes, oftentimes actually, that in American fiction, there's such a primitive conception of black people, of white people, of the complexity of interrelationships, and that's why when I had to write, or I didn't have to write it, I was offered the opportunity to write an introduction to William Faulkner's Go Down Moses, and I pointed out that when he wrote the book, when it came out in 1942, he had actually gone beyond what most writers had missed, which was a complexity of Americans of various ethnic backgrounds, from the top to the bottom. Faulkner figured that out. Now, he didn't figure it out at the start of his career, but once he got to it, he has such a complicated sense of the relationships of black and white people, because he doesn't try to reduce either group of people on the basis of statistics, sociology, or superficial data. He actually uses the mystery of human personality and makes that fundamental to his telling of his tales. And as Tom pointed out, he uses so many literary techniques, that Go Down Moses has basically remained a challenge to American writers that very few have taken up the challenge. What I mean is to actually try to do what Faulkner was doing and not condescend to anybody you're talking to, because see, the first thing is that Faulkner realized that the lowest person in the segregated South was the redneck. It wasn't the black person. Faulkner knew that, and he shows you that in The Bear, because Boone, the white guy who is prejudiced towards the black guy, he is considered below the black guy. But Faulkner lets you see it very clearly, because but that's just part of what Faulkner does in the book. He shows you who's where, who's who, who's where, and he also does what Tom and I have been trying to do in our various pieces of work, is to get beyond the cliches, because the first thing is that, see, the fundamental problem with bigotry, for instance, is remaining as far away from the person to whom you feel prejudiced as you possibly can be. Because the closer you get to the person, the greater problem you have of reducing the person to a cliche, because then you go like, that man reminds me of my uncle. Or, that woman, she reminds me of my cousin. That kid, he reminds me of my dumbass brother. Or whomever it is. But what I mean is, the closer you get to any group of people, the more you realize that you can tell, that you recognize in them things that you've seen in other people who have nothing to do with them, other than the fact that they're human beings. And that's one of the things that comes through in Go Down Moses over and over as a central theme in it.
But her question was about the heroic optimism component of what you were saying. And I think it's an interesting question, because the heroic optimism in jazz is something that is expressed in the music itself. Whereas when you're dealing with fiction, you're dealing with not just the techniques, not just the language, not just the all the stuff that is the same as what it would be in music, but you're also dealing with the story of humans, and that always goes to a place that has a tragic dimension, if you're being honest, at a certain point. And we've talked a lot of times, one writer who we both admired and come up under as something of a mentor was Albert Murray. And I think Albert Murray was thinking very definitely in that direction of trying to create a narrative that advocated, in a sense, for a kind of heroic optimism. And yet, in his fiction, I wonder if that didn't really work against his fiction being as resonant as it could have, in a sense. In other words, having that project of creating a figure who would be emblematic of the possibilities in American life, of optimism, of aspiration, didn't flatten the narrative out to a certain degree. Whereas, in Invisible Man, even though that's hardly an optimistic book, one reads it and feels exhilarated by the possibility because the literary possibilities.
Yeah, but see the thing with Invisible Man is that you have certain things that actually have exactly what she's asking about, but most of the literary people have never figured them out. For instance, the famous section with well, it's not famous, it's not even infamous, it's just an ignored section. is what should be a famous section is the section with the pushcart man. He's pushing a pushcart down in Harlem with blueprints. Now, those blueprints are actually the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Now, the way I know that is I was talking with Ellison once, and he was smoking a cigar because he liked to smoke cigars. And so I said, well, that guy pushing the pushcart, that's the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution that he has in that. And then Ellison coughed on his cigar. He said, what? How did you figure that out? I said, because that is what the Negro has always done. His job, like the pushcart man says, I have these blueprints. Now these guys have built the building, but they want to throw them away now. I don't think they need to be thrown away. I think they need to be held on to because we might be able to use them again, right? and so then Allison, now the guy is also saying a Jimmy Rushing blues from Count Basie's band, Now, all of that is pushed together in this one little vignette in the novel. So what I mean is, you can have that if you have an imaginative enough writer doing it. But the first thing is that the writer can never be too hung up, I would think, about any embarrassing material, because see, whatever anybody thinks about Philip Roth, right?
I was just going to mention
he is not concerned with whether or not his characters turn out to fulfill what any bigot wants to think about Jews. That's not Philip Roth's problem. So what I mean is, for instance, when I was talking to him once, I said, we were talking, and I said, I never understood why people complain about the opening of American Pastoral, because they think that a character who's there for 60, 70 pages suddenly disappears. I say, he didn't disappear. And so Roth says, oh, you don't think he disappeared, huh? What do you think happened to him? I said, well, he actually wrote the novel.
Tells the rest of the story.
He tells the story. And Roth said, based on what? I said, well, when the Swede supposedly is talking to a student, in his office, and the student doesn't have her legs closed. She has on a short dress, but she doesn't have her legs closed. And then the Swede has to look under her dress. I said, that's not the Swede.
That's Zucker.
That's Zuckerman. and then Ross said, Stanley Crouch, you're a very intelligent guy. That's very unusual. But the thing is, that's part of Ross' power. And what I think is that every writer who wants to be an American writer has to ignore stereotypes and ignore being told that it's like what Ross does in, wait a minute. In one of his books, I can't remember which one because he's written, he gets this this letter from this Jewish guy who writes him basically saying, what have you not done that would not make the Third Reich basically happy with your work? so it's, and he goes down this list. And so basically, Roth is saying, what he realizes, which is extremely important, is this. If you're writing a novel and you feel that your character or a character has to be a rapacious Jewish businessman, that's him. That's not all Jews, that's him. And that's the same thing that Elson does. He doesn't feel like he has to constantly throw up a sign and say, well, now you know all black people aren't like this now. Now this is a messed up guy, but I want to make sure that you know that he's just him, the messed up guy. And what I mean is that's fundamentally the freedom that a writer shoots for, is to be able to make what he gives you, what she gives you, the truth. Because in this novel I'm working on now, there's one part where these two guys are at a party of these artists, and they're talking, and so this African comes into this conversation with them, and they're talking about problems with New York, with the white art world, and how the white art critics are doing them in, and they're not getting enough sales, and they're not getting enough shows. And so this African says to them, well, I do not think that is the greatest problem for a black man. And so he said, well, what do you think the greatest problem for a black man is? He says, we're running out of a supply of white women that's large enough to handle the desires of all men who are not white all over the world. He said, just the Chinese alone could take all of them from us. If it were not the Chinese, then we have to, he said, think of all of these people. He said, if all of these people decided they too wanted a white girl, we would run out of them before we could do anything. We'd look around and all of the women have moved to China or somewhere here. He said, we can't have that, that's the real problem. And so it's a scene to me that is extremely funny, because I've heard guys say things like that. like that. I've heard them say like, wow, now these girls from the Middle East, the first thing they have to do is they have to work their way through white guys before they can get to us, because the first guys who are gonna take them out and treat them well are gonna be Jewish guys, and then they might get stuck there. And so what I mean is, the real way that people are is so far away from what is supposed to be ethnic humor to me that all you can do is just tell what you actually think is true or what you actually heard, and you lay it out there. And people may dislike it, but you know, my feeling about that is, you know, let's get to the next sentence.
Well, I think in Kansas City Lightning, we get an absolutely extraordinary marshaling of truth about life in a time and place that produced, obviously, so much great music, and one transcendent genius in particular, and I'll use the word, Charlie Parker. Anyway, I think we probably need to go and sign some books, hang out a little bit, come talk to us. We're supposed to go to the back and be there for a while. So, Stanley, this was fun. Thank you so much, everyone.